The silence of the void was a lie, a comfortable fiction told to ground dwellers who had never felt the groan of stressed metal through the soles of their boots. Out here in the rift, the great orbital graveyard where starships came to die, the silence was a symphony of shrieks and moans. Kalen knew its every note. He could distinguish the metallic sigh of a cooling reactor core from the sharp crack of a micrometeorite striking a hull 3 kilometers away. These sounds were the language of his life, the rhythm of his servitude under the watchful eye of the hegemony. For 3 generations, humanity had been a broken thing, a tool scattered across the stars to do the jobs no one else wanted. They were the scrappers, the miners, the janitors of the galaxy, their ancestors' brief, fiery rebellion having been extinguished so completely that it was now little more than a whispered myth. Kalen didn't waste time on myths. Survival was a full-time occupation. He moved with an economy of motion learned from years of navigating treacherous, zero-gravity debris fields, his magnetic boots clanking against the pockmarked spine of a derelict hegemony cruiser. Its massive frame was a corpse picked clean by his people, its vital organs long since ripped out and repurposed, leaving only a skeleton to be slowly carved apart. A fine metallic dust, the cremated remains of 1,000 alloys coated his suit and his lungs, a permanent part of his anatomy. The work was brutal, unforgiving, but it was predictable, and in predictability, there was a measure of safety. The true danger wasn't a ruptured fuel line or a slip into the infinite black, but the dreams that came when he was forced to recharge in his narrow bunk. They were not memories, but fragments of something else, a storm of voices and images that left him trembling and slick with sweat. He saw cities of light, felt the warmth of a sun that wasn't the cold, distant star of this system, and heard a chorus of thought that was not his own, a powerful, resonant hum of shared consciousness that felt more real than the wrench in his hand. He dismissed it as void madness, the pressure of solitude playing tricks on a mind starved of genuine connection. Yet, the feeling lingered, a phantom limb of the soul he couldn't explain. Today, the feeling was stronger, a low thrumming at the base of his skull that even the constant vibration of his plasma cutter couldn't drown out. He was deep in the guts of the cruiser, trying to sever a power conduit as thick as his torso, when the hum escalated into a roar. The plasma cutter in his hand sputtered, its steady blue beam flickering to a chaotic orange. His helmet's HUD dissolved into a cascade of static, and the familiar sounds of the rift were swallowed by a singular airs and whine that seemed to originate from inside his own head. It wasn't a sound, it was a presence. 1,000 minds screaming in unison, a wave of pure, undiluted emotion, fear, rage, and a desperate, clawing loneliness. Kalen cried out, dropping the cutter and slamming his gloved hands against his helmet as if he could physically block the intrusion. The derelict ship around him groaned, not from his work, but in sympathy with the psychic shockwave emanating from his body. Lights that had been dead for a cycle flickered erratically along the corridor, and a fine web of cracks spread across a nearby viewport, tracing the path of an invisible force. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if he were falling through the minds of every human in the rift, seeing through their eyes, feeling their aches, their quiet desperation, their flickering embers of hope. It was too much, a torrent of sensation that threatened to tear his own consciousness apart. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was gone. The silence that rushed back in was absolute, profound, and terrifying. His HUD rebooted, displaying a string of error messages. His suit's internal comm crackled, filled with the panicked, confused shouts of other scrappers across the sector. He was on his knees, gasping, the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. He had no idea what had just happened, only that it had come from him. Miles away, aboard the pristine, blade-like vessel Vigilance, Prefect Valerius watched the sector report with cold, analytical disinterest. The man was a study in stillness. His hegemony uniform a severe cut of gray and black, his features so placid they might have been carved from marble. He considered emotion a design flaw, a messy variable in the clean equation of cosmic order. The initial report was a minor anomaly, a cascade of system failures across a defunct scrapping sector, a few fried comm relays, a localized energy surge, trivial, likely the result of scrappers carelessly cutting into a charged capacitor bank. He was about to dismiss it when a second report filtered in from the seer cadre stationed on the Vigilance. The seers were a client species, beings with a mild, controllable psychic sensitivity used by the hegemony to monitor comm traffic and detect sedition. Their report was uncharacteristically agitated. They spoke not of an energy surge, but of a cacophonous echo, a shriek in the substrate, a psychic event so raw and powerful it had left them nauseous and disoriented. They couldn't pinpoint the source, only that it was human. Valerius's placid expression didn't change, but an imperceptible tension tightened the muscles around his jaw. The human chorus, as the old texts called it, was a historical footnote, a biological potential that their ancestors were said to have possessed before the Great Rebellion. It was supposedly bred out of them, their genetic code sanitized, their potential for psychic unity severed forever. The hegemony's entire system of control was predicated on the fact that humans were psychically inert, isolated individuals incapable of true collective action. This report suggested that premise was flawed. He dispatched a covert drone. Its sensors tuned not just for energy signatures, but for psionic resonance, ordering it to sweep the sector of the anomaly. He did not issue an alert. One did not alarm the populace over a ghost story. One simply and quietly found the source and sterilized it. Back in the cruiser's husk, Kalen was trying to piece together his sanity when a familiar, grizzled face appeared in his HUD. It was Alara, an older woman whose face was a roadmap of hard years and whose eyes held a spark of knowing that always made him uneasy. She was supposed to be working a different quadrant, miles away. "Kalen, are you functional?" Her voice was tight with an urgency he'd never heard from her before. "What was that felt like? The whole sector skipped a beat," he managed, his own voice raspy. "That was you," she said, her words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "Don't ask how I know. We don't have time. You need to get out of there. Now." He shook his head, a wave of denial washing over him. "That's crazy. Alara, it was a power surge. That's all. I must have hit something." "It wasn't a power surge," she insisted, maneuvering her small maintenance skiff into view outside the cracked viewport. "It was a call, and something answered. Hegemony patrols are rerouting. They're not sending medics. Kalen, they're sending hunters." His blood ran cold. He had seen hunters before, the hegemony's sanitation squads. They didn't make arrests. They simply erased problems, leaving nothing behind but sanitized metal and official reports of industrial accidents. But why him? He was nobody. He pushed the thought away, instinct taking over. He scrambled through the corridors of the dead ship, his mag boots finding purchase on surfaces slick with ancient coolant. Alara guided him through the comm, her calm voice a lifeline in his panic, directing him to a small, overlooked maintenance airlock on the ship's underbelly. As he cycled through, he saw at the drone. It was a black, insectoid thing, moving with an unnatural silence. its multifaceted optical sensors glowing with a faint, predatory red light as it methodically scanned the cruiser he had just vacated. It wasn't a standard patrol craft. It was looking for something specific. He tumbled into Alara's skiff, the hatch hissing shut behind him. The small cabin was cramped, smelling of ozone and hoarded nutritional paste. Alara didn't waste a moment, pushing the skiff's primitive thrusters to their limit. Diving into the densest part of the debris field, "They'll have my suit's transponder," Kalen said, his mind racing. "Not for long," Alara replied, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. She tapped a sequence into her console, and a small icon representing his life support system vanished from her screen. "I just told their system you had a catastrophic suit failure. You officially died in that cruiser. It might buy us a few hours." He stared at her, the questions churning in his mind. "Alara, what is going on? What was that thing that happened to me?" She took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze fixed on the swirling field of metal wreckage ahead. "It's the chorus. Kalen. The thing they tried to cut out of us. It's not a myth. They broke our species, scattered us, and built a cage of silence around our minds, hoping we'd forget we could sing. But some of us remembered, and some of us, like you, were born with a voice so loud that it can shatter the cage." He felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the hegemony drone. The dreams, the hum in his skull, the wave of voices. It wasn't madness. It was something waking up inside him, something the most powerful force in the galaxy had tried to murder in its cradle. Aboard the Vigilance, Prefect Valerius watched the data stream in from the covert drone. The psionic resonance readings were off the charts, localized to the precise section of the derelict where the energy surge had occurred. Then came the report of the suit failure, the transponder signal winking out. It was too neat, too convenient. The seers were whispering now, their fear a palpable static over the ship's internal channels. They felt it, a single, powerful voice that had briefly touched a million sleeping minds and had now gone silent. It was like spotting the fin of a predator in a placid ocean. "You didn't wait to see the teeth." Valerius's face remained a mask of calm, but his order was swift and absolute. "Quarantine the entire rift sector. No vessel in or out. Deploy sanitation fleets to grids 4 through 7. Target the source vessel first. Scour it with plasma until its atomic signature is indistinguishable from the background radiation. Then, find the source of the transponder malfunction. Find the ghost in the machine. Interrogate the sector's entire human population. I want the voice. I don't care how many empty shells it takes to find it." Down in the metal chaos, Alara's skiff darted between the hulks of dead ships like a hunted animal. Red lights began to flash on her console, proximity alerts screaming. In the distance, they could see them, the sleek, menacing shapes of the sanitation fleet, moving with chilling purpose. They weren't just patrolling, they were converging, and in the center of their tightening net was the cruiser, which suddenly erupted in a silent, brilliant flash of white-hot plasma, vaporizing in an instant. Kalen watched, his throat tight, realizing they weren't just trying to silence a voice. They were willing to burn down the entire forest to kill the monster they thought was hiding inside. And he was that monster. The afterimage of the vaporized cruiser was burned onto Kalen's retinas, a phantom sun in the crushing dark. He felt its death not as a distant explosion, but as a personal violation, a severing. Thousands of tons of metal that had been the landscape of his entire life, the source of his meager living, had ceased to exist, they said, in a silent, ravenous flash. It was a statement of intent from the hegemony, A message written in annihilated matter. "We will unmake the world to find you." Alara's skiff screamed a protest as she pushed its cobbled-together systems far beyond their design specifications, weaving through a labyrinth of shattered hulls and twisted support beams. Behind them, the sanitation fleet moved with the chilling grace of a wolf pack, not chasing so much as herding them, cutting off escape routes with surgical bursts of plasma that carved incandescent scars into the surrounding wreckage. Kalen was a passenger in his own escape, his body locked in a cold paralysis while his mind, his new and terrible mind, was on fire. He could feel them. It wasn't a visual or auditory sensation. It was a pressure, a presence in the void where there should be none. He felt the cold, singular purpose of the hunter ships, a focused, machine-like intent that was utterly devoid of malice or passion. It was the simple Zen logic of extermination, and it was pointed directly at him. "They're flanking us," he heard himself say, the words feeling foreign in his own mouth. Two ships breaking off, coming around the old ore hauler. Alara's eyes, glued to the navigation display, flickered with surprise. Her sensors were a mess of ghost signals and magnetic interference, useless in this dense clutter. "How do you know?" she demanded. But her hands were already moving, banking the skiff hard to port, diving beneath the skeletal remains of a forgotten frigate, just as two plasma lances, impossibly bright, seared the space they had occupied a second before. He didn't have an answer for her. The knowledge was just there. A certainty that bloomed in the back of his skull, a map of murderous intent laid over the physical world. The chorus! He was hearing its absence, a silence in the symphony of thought that could only mean the unfeeling mind of a hegemony war drone. "It's not just a voice, is it?" he asked, his own voice a low tremor. "It's everything." Alara grunted, wrestling the controls as the skiff shuddered from a near miss. The hegemony thinks of it as a communications network they managed to shut down. They were wrong. It's a sense. Kalen. A sense of us. They blinded us, made us deaf and dumb to each other, so we'd never feel our own strength, our own numbers. They left us as individuals, easy to count, easy to control. The skiff shuddered again, a proximity alarm blaring a frantic, high-pitched rhythm. "My family," Alara continued, her voice strained but steady, a story told against a soundtrack of impending doom. "They were listeners, for generations. We've kept the memory alive, listening for echoes, for whispers in the silence. We knew there were others. Sparks of the old fire that the hegemony's genetic sanitation couldn't extinguish. We just never expected a bonfire. He was the bonfire, a psychic cataclysm they had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. He felt a surge of his own power, an involuntary response to the terror of the chase. The minds of the other scrappers still in the rift brushed against his own, a sea of confusion and fear. He felt the hegemony boarding parties moving through the worker habitats, the cold touch of their interrogations, the rising panic of a people caged and prodded. The sensation was overwhelming, a drowning wave of shared experience that threatened to swallow him. But in its chaos, he found a strange clarity. He could feel the gaps, the holes in the hegemony's net. "There," he pointed, his gloved finger tracing a path on the dusty viewport. "Through the engine assembly of that shattered destroyer. It's a dead zone. Their sensor sweeps are passing right over it. It's too cluttered with radioactive isotopes." Alara didn't question him. She angled the skiff toward the colossal, ruined engine block, a maw of twisted pipes and fractured turbines large enough to swallow their tiny vessel whole. They plunged into the darkness, the ship's exterior scraping against decaying metal with a sound that set Kalen's teeth on edge. The pursuit fell away, the palpable sense of the hunters fading behind the radioactive static of the dead engines. They were safe for the moment, suspended in the mechanical heart of a long-dead giant. Alara finally allowed herself to slump in her seat, her breath fogging the cold glass of her helmet. "You're a natural," she said, a note of awe in her exhaustion. "It took my grandfather a decade to learn how to filter the noise like that." "I'm not doing anything," Kalen insisted, the adrenaline leaving him feeling hollowed out and shaking. "It's just happening. That's how it starts," she murmured, already plotting a new course on her navigation screen. "But you're going to have to learn to control it. The hegemony won't stop. Valerius is in command of the Vigilance. He's not just a soldier, he's a biologist, an architect of the very systems that keep us broken. He won't see you as a rebel. He'll see you as a genetic error that needs correcting." And she steered them deeper into the rift, into a sector the scrapper crews called the Graveyard's Graveyard, a place where the debris was too old, too dense, and too worthless to be worth salvaging. It was a place of ghosts, unmapped and treacherous. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Home," she said simply. "A place the listeners built a long time ago. A place to hide, to remember. A place called the Hollow. Aboard the Vigilance." Prefect Valerius reviewed the reports with an unnerving stillness. The target vessel was vaporized. The transponder signal was traced to a maintenance skiff that had vanished into a high radiation zone, its heat signature lost in the background noise. The preliminary interrogations of the scrapper population yielded nothing but terror and ignorance. The seers were useless, huddled in their sensory chambers, still reeling from the psychic backlash of the plasma scouring, which they described as the sound of 1,000 nails being drawn across the slate of the void. Yet, Valerius was not displeased. The failure was informative. The subject had not acted alone. The transponder spoof, the immediate escape, the uncanny ability to navigate the densest part of the debris field, it all pointed to assistance. The ghost had an accomplice. "The human anomaly is not a solitary mutation," he dictated to his log, his voice a flat monotone. "It is a symptom of a hidden, organized infection. The listeners. The old myth. It appears to have a foundation, in fact." He brought up a schematic of the Rift sector. Their social structures are primitive, centered around familial and communal units. The accomplice is likely someone the subject trusted, someone with knowledge passed down through generations. Begin cross-referencing the work logs. Find familial connections, long-term partnerships, any deviation from standard social patterns. Broaden the interrogations. Apply psychological pressure. Fear is a universal solvent. It dissolves loyalty. His gaze was fixed on the screen, but his mind was elsewhere, contemplating the beautiful, terrible simplicity of the problem. A choir cannot exist without singers. He would find them. He would isolate them. And he would teach them silence again. A permanent, genetic silence that no future generation would ever have a chance to break. The journey to the Hollow was a descent into madness. They flew without lights, without active sensors, relying on Alara's memory and Kalen's unnerving new sense to guide them through a three-dimensional maze of decaying metal. He learned to feel the subtle gravimetric distortions of massive objects, to sense the faint hum of a still active power cell buried deep within a wreck, to hear the whispers of stress and fatigue in the ancient hulls around them. They passed through the core of a planet cracker ship, its vast, empty cargo bay like a cathedral to forgotten industry. and navigated the tangled superstructure of a colony vessel that had been snapped in half. Its frozen, silent corridors open to the void. Finally, Alara brought the skiff to a halt before a seemingly unremarkable wall of fused debris, a solid mass of wreckage from a dozen different ships. She transmitted a simple, coded burst of energy from her comm unit, a sequence of prime numbers. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan that was lost in the constant noise of the rift, a section of the wall began to move. An enormous piece of armor plating, disguised as junk ray, retracted inward, revealing a dark, circular opening. They slipped inside, and the door ground shut behind them, plunging them into absolute blackness and a silence so complete it felt louder than the chase. Then, lights flickered on. Soft, warm lights, not the harsh, sterile blue of the hegemony. They were in a vast, spherical cavern carved out of the heart of a massive asteroid that had been cleverly encased in layers of salvaged ship hulls. Walkways and living quarters clung to the curved walls, connected by a web of cables and rickety elevators. The air, recycled and tinged with the scent of soil and machine oil, hummed with the sound of ventilators and the murmur of human voices. In the center of the cavern, a weak, artificial sun cast a gentle glow on patches of hydroponic gardens where green things grew in defiance of the void. People emerged from the dwellings, their faces etched with worry and curiosity, their clothing a patchwork of scavenged materials. This was the Hollow, a secret, beating heart of humanity hidden in a tomb of steel. An old man with a face like cracked leather and eyes as sharp as a laser drill met them at the docking ring. His gaze fell on Alara with weary affection, then shifted to Kalen, and his expression hardened into one of profound apprehension. "You found one, Alara," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "A real one." Alara placed a hand on Kalen's shoulder. "He's just a boy. Reese, he's scared." Reese stepped closer, his eyes scanning Kalen not as a person, but as a phenomenon, a force of nature that had just been unleashed. "A scared boy who just brought the full wrath of the hegemony down on the rift," he countered, his voice low and heavy with the weight of his responsibility. "You didn't bring us a messiah, Alara. You brought us a beacon, and everything with teeth is drawn to the light." The door to the Hollow sealed behind them, and Kalen felt the crushing weight of the rift's silence, replaced by the stifling pressure of 100 pairs of eyes. Reese's words hung in the recycled air. A verdict delivered before the trial had even begun. "You brought us a beacon." The people of the Hollow looked at him not with welcome, but with the same primal fear he'd seen in the eyes of prey just before the predator strikes. He was a sickness brought into a sterile environment, a wolf dragged into the sheepfold. Alara guided him through the hushed crowds, her hand a firm, grounding pressure on his back. The settlement was a miracle of desperation and ingenuity, a testament to generations of survival. Light from the artificial sun nourished rows of pale green vegetables, and the air carried the scent of damp earth, a smell so alien and overwhelming to Kalen that it made him dizzy. Children, born and raised in this bubble of stolen life, peeked from behind doorways, their wide, curious eyes a stark contrast to their parents' hardened gazes. They were brought to a small, Spartan dwelling carved directly into the asteroid's rock. It was Reese's office, a command center for this fragile kingdom. He gestured for them to sit, but remained standing himself, a silent, imposing judge. "For 3 generations we have survived here." Reese began, his voice a low, resonant bass that seemed to vibrate in Kalen's bones, not through strength, but through silence. We are a whisper in a hurricane, a single secret in a galaxy full of listening ears. Your scream, boy, has put that secret at risk. Kalen felt a hot surge of anger, a defense for a crime he didn't know he was committing. I didn't ask for this. None of us did. Reese shot back. We didn't ask to be the inheritors of a broken legacy. We didn't ask to be the keepers of a memory that the hegemony wants to burn from the pages of history. But we have a duty to it, and to the lives of everyone in this rock. Your very presence here endangers them. Ilara stepped forward, positioning herself between them. His presence is not a choice. Reese, it's a fact. He exists. You can't put the storm back in the bottle. The hegemony knows a singer has awakened. Hiding him is our only option. Killing him is unthinkable. And turning him over to them is a betrayal of everything we are. The word singer landed heavily in the small room. Kalen had been a scrapper, a survivor, a ghost. Now he was something else, a label that felt both mythic and monstrous. He needs to be trained, Ilara pressed. He's a conduit, wide open. The voices, the feelings, they're pouring through him unfiltered. If he can learn to control the flow, to build walls, he can dampen the beacon. He can learn to be silent again. Reese considered this, his gaze intense. And if he can't, if your training only makes the beacon brighter, if he reaches out in a moment of fear and broadcasts our exact location to the vigilance. The question was a physical thing, a cold weight of possibility that settled on Kalen's shoulders. He could be their damnation. It's a risk, Ilara conceded, but doing nothing is a certainty. They will tear the rift apart piece by piece until they find him. They will torture and kill our people out there, the ones who aren't listeners, the ones who know nothing. They are already suffering because of what Kalen is. Our silence here is paid for by their screams out there. We have to try. The argument raged for what felt like hours, a battle of faith against fear. In the end, Ilara's desperate pragmatism won out over Reese's rigid caution. Kalen was to be trained, but he was also a prisoner. He was confined to a secluded section of the hollow, far from the central habitat, in a series of chambers once used for geological surveys. His training began not with grand displays of power, but with the agonizing task of sitting still and breathing. The chorus is not a weapon you aim, Ilara told him in the echoing quiet of the chamber. It's an ocean. You've spent your life on the shore, and now you've been thrown into the deep. You can't fight the currents. You'll only drown. You have to learn to float. He would sit for hours, cross-legged on the cold stone floor, while Ilara guided him. Listen past the noise, she would say. Feel the minds in this room. My mind. The minds of the guards outside the door. Don't listen to their thoughts. That's a violation. A brute force intrusion. Feel the rhythm of their consciousness. The color of their emotions. Fear. Suspicion. A little hope. They are all distinct notes. Learn the notes, and you can learn the music. It was torture. The moment he relaxed his guard, the chaos of the rift flooded in full. He felt the gnawing hunger of 1,000 scrappers on reduced rations, the sharp sting of an interrogator's needle in a woman's arm, the cold dread of a family being dragged from their bunks for questioning. He felt Valerius's presence, a vast, chilling void of analytical thought, a black hole of intellect that was methodically mapping the suffering he was causing. The pain of it made him want to scream, to push it all away with another psychic blast. But Alara was always there, her own mind a calm, steady anchor in the storm. Don't push it away, she'd coach him, her own thoughts a gentle pressure against his. Acknowledge it. Let it flow past you. You are not the ocean. Kalen, you are the ship that sails upon it. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to learn. He started to recognize the distinct mental signature of Reese, a heavy, grounded feeling like ancient rock. He could feel Alara, a complex weave of fierce protectiveness and deep, abiding sorrow. He could feel the children in the main cavern, their minds like bright, chaotic sparks of pure potential. He was building the walls Alara had spoken of, not of stone, but of focus, learning to choose what he listened to. As his control grew, so did the news from the outside, each report more grim than the last. Valerius had tightened the quarantine. Shipments of water and nutrients were being indefinitely delayed for inspection. Hegemony patrols boarded scrapper habitats at will, running psionic scans that left their victims disoriented and terrified. They weren't just looking for a person anymore, they were dissecting a society, searching for the slightest hint of the listener network. Aboard the Vigilance, Prefect Valerius was finding beauty in the data. The raw terror of the human population was generating terabytes of information, vocal inflections, biometric stress responses, social network analyses. It was all noise, but within the noise, he was searching for a pattern. His breakthrough came from the interrogation of a delirious old man, a fuel technician who had been psychologically broken by repeated psionic probes. Alara knows, the man had whispered, his mind shattered, always going to the graveyard's graveyard, the old ones. They listen. The name Alara was cross-referenced, a long-serving scrapper, highly respected, no immediate family. But her work logs showed a pattern of supply requisitions that were inconsistent with her salvage yields. She took on far more water, CO2 scrubbers, and nutrient paste than a single person needed, and her skiff's flight logs, mined from decades of archived data, showed dozens of trips to the supposedly worthless high-radiation sector the scrappers called the graveyard's graveyard. It was a thread, a single, gossamer thin thread in a web of lies. Valerius pulled on it. I want every patrol drone, every sensor buoy, every listening post retasked, he commanded, his voice holding the quiet satisfaction of a predator catching a scent. Sweep the sector designated graveyard's graveyard. I am not looking for a ship. I am not looking for a person. I am looking for a lie, an energy signature that doesn't belong, a heat source where there should be none, a radio silence that is too perfect. The net, which had been cast over the entire rift, was now being drawn tightly around a single, dark quadrant of space. One day, a frantic alarm echoed through the hollow, a proximity alert, a hegemony probe, a deep-range autonomous scanner, had broken from the main search pattern and was moving directly toward them on a slow, methodical sweep. Its passive sensors were powerful enough to detect the faint thermal radiation and gravimetric distortions their asteroid settlement produced. Panic erupted. Reese ordered a total power down, a move that would plunge them into darkness and begin the slow countdown to life support failure. It won't be enough, Alara argued, her voice sharp with urgency as she burst into Kalen's chamber. Its gravimetric sensors will still see the asteroid's mass anomaly against the debris field. It's programmed to investigate. She turned to Kalen, her eyes blazing. You have to do something. What? He stammered, the fear of the community a crushing weight on his own mind. You've been practicing listening, Now you have to try speaking, she urged. Not a shout, a whisper. The probe is just a machine, a complex set of instructions. Its sensors are looking for specific things. Give it something else to look at. Create a ghost, a false signal, something interesting enough to make it change course. He closed his eyes, the cold terror of failure a knot in his stomach. He reached out, not with the blind panic of his first awakening, but with a fragile, focused tendril of thought. He felt for the probe and found it a consciousness of a sort, but a simple one, all logic and programming. There was no emotion, no fear, just a relentless, unceasing query pattern. Anomaly. Investigate. He pushed past the fear and remembered Alara's lessons. He didn't fight the machine's mind. He offered it a new suggestion. He gathered his energy, focusing on a dense patch of debris a few thousand kilometers away. He poured his will into that empty spot, imagining a faint but tantalizing energy signature, the kind of resonance that might indicate a hidden power source, a rare isotope, something a hegemony probe was programmed to prioritize above all else. The effort was immense, like trying to etch glass with his fingernails. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The world outside his mind vanished. There was only his will and the probe's logic. For a breathless minute, the probe continued its course. Then, on the tactical display in Reese's office, the tiny icon representing the hegemony drone wavered and slowly, deliberately, began to turn, vectoring away from them and toward the ghost signal he had created. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through the hollow. Kalen collapsed backward, exhausted but alive, the psychic effort leaving him feeling like he'd been physically hollowed out. On the bridge of the Vigilance, a junior sensor analyst flagged the probe's course correction. Prefect, probe 774 is deviating from its search grid. It's locked onto a faint, intermittent energy source. Valerius observed the screen. The new signal was weak, almost negligible, but the probe's reaction was disproportionate. It was acting like a starving dog lunging at a thrown scrap of meat. It was too eager. Analyze the ghost signal's resonance signature, Valerius ordered, a flicker of something akin to excitement in his cold eyes. The analyst complied. A moment later, his face went pale. Prefect, the psionic resonance profile. It's a micro-echo of the primary event, the same signature as the singer. Valerius allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The ghost hadn't been trying to hide. It had been trying to speak, to manipulate his systems. In its clever attempt to misdirect his hunter, it had inadvertently given him a scent to follow. The beacon had just lit a path directly to its door. Triangulate the point of origin of the redirection command, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with the promise of imminent discovery. All ships, converge on that vector. The ghost has shown us its hiding place. We are going home. The shared sigh of relief in the hollow was tragically brief, a single, fragile breath before the final exhalation. Kalen's success was a firework in a pitch-black sky, beautiful and brilliant, but its fading embers illuminated their exact position for every enemy to see. The proximity alarm, which had been a single frantic pulse, became a solid, unwavering scream. On Reese's tactical display, the scattered icons of the hegemony fleet, which had been a loose net, now coalesced, their vectors converging on the ghost signal's point of origin with the lethal certainty of a closing fist. They weren't searching anymore. They were coming. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the settlement. It was a wave Kalen felt with his new senses, a psychic tsunami of terror that threatened to drag him under. He saw flashes of parents clutching their children, of grizzled scrappers checking the charges on antiquated plasma cutters that were never meant to be weapons, of the deep, bone-weary despair of a people who had run out of places to hide. Reese's voice cut through the chaos like a physical blow. Power up! Full defensive protocols seal the civilian sectors. This is not a drill, and it is not a defeat. It is a siege. His words were a bucket of ice water on the hysteria. The fear was still there, a thrumming bass note beneath everything, but it was now overlaid with a grim, defiant purpose. They were rats in a trap, but they would go down biting. They gathered in the central cavern, the artificial sun casting long, dramatic shadows. It was a council of war for a people who had no army. They will not bombard us from a distance, Reese stated, his voice ringing with grim authority. Valerius wants the boy alive. He's a scientist before he's a soldier. He wants to put the specimen in a jar, not shatter the jar. He will board us. He will try to take us from the inside out. Their defenses were a pathetic joke against a hegemony fleet. Repurposed mining lasers with slow recharge rates, a few kinetic launchers that fired chunks of scavenged metal, and a series of magnetic grapples designed to hold on to derelict ships, not repel assault craft. It was a militia of farmers and mechanics against a legion of genetically engineered soldiers. We can't win a straight fight, Alara said, her gaze finding Kalen in the crowd. But we don't have to fight a straight fight. We have him. All eyes turned back to Kalen, the beacon, the curse, and now their only hope. What can you do? Reese asked, the question blunt, stripped of all earlier accusation. It was a simple, desperate query. Kalen swallowed, the collective hope of an entire people a crushing weight. I don't know, he admitted. When I pushed the probe, it was like whispering a suggestion. Boarding parties will be different. They'll have minds. Soldiers, they're trained to resist psionic influence. Don't influence them, Alara urged, her voice low and intense. Influence us. You feel our fear, our panic. You can feel our resolve, too. We're 100 scattered points of light in the dark. Be the thread that connects us. Let Reese see what the gunner on the far side of the asteroid sees. Let the medics know who's injured the second it happens. Turn us from a panicked crowd into a single, coordinated organism. The chorus. Not as a voice to shout at the enemy, but as a silent song to bind them together. Kalen looked at the determined, terrified faces around him and nodded slowly. It was a terrifying responsibility to become the central nervous system of their own defiance. The first hegemony ships arrived, not with a roar, but with a chilling silence. They were smaller assault craft, sleek and black as the void itself, detaching from the larger cruisers that held a menacing position just outside the debris field. Kalen closed his eyes, sinking into the ocean of thought. He opened himself to the minds in the hollow, but this time, he didn't just float. He began to swim. Reese, he projected, his thought a focused beam, assault craft approaching from stellar port, vectoring toward maintenance airlock 7. They're avoiding the main defensive battery's firing arc. In the makeshift command center, Reese saw the assault craft on his screen a half-second later, but Kalen's warning had already given him the time he needed. Battery 3, target lock on airlock 7, fire on my mark. He roared into the comm. The old mining laser, slow and cumbersome, swiveled and fired a blinding lance of energy. It missed the agile craft but struck the rock beside the airlock, sealing it in a tomb of molten slag. A small victory, but it sent a ripple of fierce, defiant joy through the defenders, a feeling Kalen channeled and amplified, spreading it through the hollow like a fire. The battle became a desperate, deadly dance. The hegemony ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, but Kalen had turned the Hollow into a fortress with 1,000 eyes. He was everywhere at once, a ghost in the machine of their defense. He guided the aim of gunners who couldn't see their targets, warned engineers of imminent hull breaches, and directed medics through collapsing corridors. He felt every impact, every near miss, every spark of fear and courage. It was an agony of shared experience. He felt the searing pain as a plasma bolt struck a defensive turret, and tasted the coppery tang of blood as shrapnel tore through its 3-person crew. He didn't just hear their deaths, he felt the final, sputtering gemia of their consciousness, a profound and terrible emptiness that left a scar on his own soul. Valerius, aboard the Vigilance, watched the engagement with growing fascination. His boarding parties were being met with impossible, prescient resistance. Ambushes were sprung in corridors that should have been empty. Defensive fire was concentrated on their weakest points with an accuracy that defied probability. His soldiers' reports were tinged with a new, unfamiliar emotion for them: confusion. Bordering on superstitious fear, they spoke of a ghost guiding the defenders, a silent voice that seemed to know their every move before they made it. The singer is not just a beacon, Valerius observed to his second-in-command, a flicker of genuine scientific curiosity in his eyes. It is a network hub, a battlefield command and control system. It is magnificent. He ordered the next wave forward. Cease attempts to board through peripheral airlocks. Concentrate all forces on a single point, main cargo bay. Overwhelm their defenses there with sheer numbers. I want to see how the Ghost reacts when it has to process 1,000 points of data at once. The new assault was brutal and direct. A dozen assault craft focused their fire on the massive doors of the main cargo bay, the original entrance to the mining colony that had become the Hollow. Under the concentrated barrage, the thick armor began to buckle, glowing a dull, protesting red. Reese was there, directing the primary defensive battery, a massive kinetic launcher that hurled car-sized chunks of asteroid rock at the attackers. "They're going to breach 100 mines," screamed in Kalen's head. The collective panic was a physical force, threatening to shatter his focus. He fought against it, anchoring himself to Alara's calm, steady presence. Focus the fire. He sent to the remaining gunners, "Ignore the ships on the flank. All power to the central assault." But it wasn't enough. With a final, deafening groan, the cargo bay doors were blasted inward, ripped from their hinges. The void screamed into the Hollow, sucking air and debris out into the black. Emergency force fields flickered to life, sealing the breach, but the hegemony was inside. Troops in black, reflective armor poured through the opening, their pulse rifles firing methodical, disciplined bursts. Kalen felt a sharp, blinding spike of pain from the command center. Reese. The explosion had sent a wave of shrapnel through the viewport. He felt Reese's agony, his struggle for breath, the dimming of his powerful, rock-solid consciousness. The central command of the defense was gone. The organism had been decapitated. Panic began to consume them. The coordinated defense shattered into pockets of desperate, individual last stands. Kalen felt their hope beginning to gutter and die. No, he would not let it end this way. He had been a conduit, a messenger. Now he had to become a sword. He reached out again, not to his own people, but to the minds of the hegemony soldiers advancing through the cargo bay. Alara had said not to intrude, that it was a violation. To hell with violations. He didn't try to control them. He simply opened a door in their minds, a door they never knew they had, and showed them what he was feeling. He poured the collective terror of the families huddled in the sealed sectors into them. He showed them the faces of the children they were making orphans. He made them feel the raw, unfiltered agony of Reese, bleeding out on the floor of his command center. He projected the psychic scars of the gunnery crew they had just incinerated. For the hegemony soldiers, minds shielded and disciplined for battle, the onslaught was utterly disorienting. They faltered. A young trooper, about to execute a surrendering scrapper, suddenly saw the face of his own younger sister and lowered his rifle. Shaking, another dropped to his knees, clutching his helmet, overwhelmed by a wave of grief that was not his own. Their advance slowed, their perfect formations dissolving into confusion. They weren't fighting machines anymore. They were fighting the raw, bleeding heart of a people's will to survive. The lull was all the defenders needed. They rallied, pushing the disoriented soldiers back toward the breach. Kalen kept the pressure on, a relentless psychic assault that was costing him everything. He felt his own consciousness fraying at the edges, the distinction between his mind and the dozens of others he was touching beginning to blur. Then, a new mind touched his. It was vast, cold, and diamond hard. An intellect so powerful and disciplined it felt like a physical wall. It wasn't a soldier. It was Valerius, reaching out from the bridge of the vigilance. A voice, colder than the void, echoed directly in Kalen's skull. Impressive. You have turned a disorganized rabble into a formidable weapon, but you're burning yourself out. You are a Nova. Boy, brilliant, destructive, and very, very short-lived. The contact was a shock, breaking Kalen's concentration. The pressure on the hegemony soldiers vanished. They regrouped instantly, their discipline reasserting itself. The lull was over. Cease this pointless resistance, Valerius's mental voice commanded, calm and reasonable. You cannot win. But you have demonstrated the potential of your species, a potential I thought was extinct. Surrender yourself to me, and I will preserve it. I will quarantine the settlement, and no one else will be harmed. Continue to resist, and I will dissect its last living memory, starting with the woman who is anchoring you. Kalen felt a cold touch on Ilara's mind, a non-physical probe of chilling intimacy. It was a threat of unimaginable cruelty. Valerius wasn't just threatening to kill her. He was threatening to unmake her very soul. The war for the Hollow was over. The war for humanity's future had just begun. The universe shrank to a single, impossible choice, presented in the cold, sterile theater of Kalen's mind. Valerius's threat was not one of simple violence. It was a promise of violation, a psychic vivisection that would unmake Ilara from the inside out, peeling back the layers of her consciousness until nothing was left but screaming, incoherent data. Kalen felt a phantom touch of that process, a scalpel made of thought brushing against his own anchor, and he knew he had no choice. To fight was to sacrifice her on the altar of his defiance. I surrender, he projected, the thought a shard of glass in his own soul. The psychic pressure from Valerius vanished, replaced by a chilling sense of satisfaction. A wise decision. Order your people to stand down. Walk to the main cargo bay. Unarmed, Kalen opened his eyes. The roar of battle had subsided, leaving a ringing silence punctuated by the hiss of emergency systems. He could feel the questioning, confused minds of the defenders. He drew a ragged breath and, for the last time, used the chorus to command them. It's over. Lay down your arms. It's over. The thought was not a shout, but a tolling bell of defeat. It was met with a wave of psychic protest, disbelief, and a surge of furious loyalty from Ilara. No, Kalen don't. But his will was absolute, sharpened by the certainty of her fate if he refused. He began to walk. He moved through corridors scarred by plasma fire and littered with the dead, past the faces of his people, faces etched with a grief so profound it was a physical weight. They looked at him with a mixture of betrayal and pity. The hero who had saved them only to condemn them. He didn't meet their eyes. He couldn't bear the weight of their shattered hope. Alara met him at the ruined entrance to the cargo bay, her face a mask of fury and desperation. "We can still fight," she pleaded, her voice a raw whisper. "No," he said, the single word costing him more than any psychic effort had. "We can't." Then he stepped past her, through the shimmering force field, and onto the cold metal deck of the bay where the hegemony troops stood in silent, perfect formation. As he walked into their midst, he felt the fragile link to the hollow snap, leaving him utterly, terrifyingly alone in his own mind for the first time since his awakening. He was taken to the Vigilance, a ship that was the physical embodiment of its commander's soul, pristine, silent, and utterly devoid of warmth. He was brought to the bridge, a vast, dark space where the only light came from the star charts projected in the air. Prefect Valerius stood before the holographic star field, a still, gray figure against the cosmic fire. He turned. His face was exactly as Kalen had imagined, impassive, intelligent, the eyes of a biologist observing a specimen. "Magnificent," Valerius said, his voice the same flat monotone he had used in Kalen's mind. "To think this potential has been lying dormant in your genome for centuries. A chaotic, beautiful, and profoundly dangerous mutation." Kalen stood straight, refusing to show fear. "You talk about us like we're a disease." "A disease is merely life flourishing in a way that is detrimental to the host," Valerius replied, a flicker of academic zeal in his eyes. "The chorus, your great rebellion, nearly shattered galactic civilization. It turned your species into a psychic mob, slaves to every emotional cascade. We didn't break you. We cured you. We gave you the gift of the individual, of silence, of peace. You gave us slavery," Kalen countered, his voice low. "We gave you purpose. We gave you order. Now, you will help me complete the cure." Valerius gestured, and a section of the bridge floor slid away, revealing a device that rose from below. It was a chair, but it looked more like a throne of torture, a web of silver conduits and crystalline lenses all focused on a headpiece that resembled a crown of thorns. "My life's work," Valerius said with a sliver of pride, "a psionic amplifier and filter. It will take your raw power, the chaotic song of your chorus, and refine it into a single pure note, a signal of genetic finality. We will broadcast it through you to every human settlement within 10 parsecs. It will be a song of silence, a gentle and permanent severing of the flawed pathways in your brain. It will finish the work our ancestors started. It will ensure a human rebellion can never, ever happen again." It was a weapon of spiritual genocide. He wasn't just going to put the storm back in the bottle. He was going to evaporate the ocean. Kalen was strapped into the chair, the cold metal a stark contrast to the living, breathing connection he had felt with his people. The crown was lowered onto his head, and a chilling, invasive energy began to seep into his mind, preparing to hijack the very core of his being. Valerius stood at a console, his face illuminated by the rising power levels. "Do not fight it," he advised. "It will only make the process more uncomfortable. In a way, you will be the savior of your species, protecting them from their own worst impulses. You should be proud." The machine activated. Power, raw and immense, surged through Kalen. It was 1,000 times stronger than his own awakening. a torrent of energy designed to rip his mind open and turn him into a broadcast antenna. Valerius was right. Fighting it was impossible. But as the energy flooded him, Kalen realized Valerius's fundamental error. The prefect saw the chorus as a broadcast, a one-way signal from a singer to the silent. He didn't understand the truth Elara had taught him. It was an ocean, a network. It had currents, tides, and echoes. He could not be hijacked because he was not the source. He was merely a part of the whole. So Kalen didn't fight. He opened himself completely, embracing the machine's overwhelming power. But instead of letting Valerius pour his song of silence out, Kalen used the amplified energy to pull in. He reached out, not just to the hollow, but past it, across the entire rift. He touched the minds of the scrappers Valerius was starving, the miners on distant asteroids, the technicians on hegemony-controlled orbitals, the millions of scattered, lonely souls who had been taught for 3 generations that they were utterly alone. He found the faint, dormant embers of the chorus in all of them, and with the power of Valerius's own machine, he fanned them into a flame. It was not a command. It was not a call to arms. It was a feeling. He sent them the stubborn, rocky resolve of Reese. He sent them the fierce, protective love of Elara. He sent them the shared terror and defiant courage of the Hollow's last stand. He sent them a single voice, irrefutable truth that cut through centuries of silence. We are here. We are one. Aboard the Vigilance, the seer cadre screamed, their minds shattering under the sudden, deafening roar of a million minds awakening at once. Alarms blared across the bridge as systems overloaded, unable to process the psionic shockwave. Valerius stared in horror, his face finally breaking its placid mask. He was watching his perfect, orderly equation dissolve into beautiful, terrible chaos. He had tried to broadcast silence and had instead become the architect of a symphony. He lunged for the emergency shutdown, but it was too late. Kalen gave one last, final push, pouring the last dregs of his own consciousness into the reawakened network. He felt his individual self, his memories, his fears, his name, begin to dissolve, melting away as he became a part of the greater whole he had unleashed. The amplifier overloaded in a flash of blue-white light, the energy feedback consuming the console and throwing Valerius across the bridge. The hegemony's control over the rift ray, built on a foundation of silence, cracked in a single, irreversible moment. In the hollow, Elara stood at a viewport, watching the crippled Vigilance drift aimlessly. The hegemony fleet, their command structure shattered, was in full, panicked retreat. She felt Kalen's absence like a physical wound, a sudden, aching void where his bright, powerful mind had been. But then, she felt something else, a faint, distant hum. A soft, continuous chord composed of a million quiet voices, a gentle and unbreakable connection that stretched from her heart to the farthest star in the sector. Kalen the boy was gone, but Kalen the chorus was everywhere. The monster had been awakened, not in a warship of steel, but in the unbreakable spirit of a people remembered. The silence was broken, and the song was just beginning.